progressive and maturing, she read extensively into the relationship between the Bible and science and learned to question traditional parenting. So she was an intelligent woman, and she read a lot, and she asked questions. She dared to ask questions about religion and how religion can be connected with science, and thereby leading to questions about traditional faith. She broke with her father because she refused to attend church. Later on, she was always in contact with a lot of thinkers of her time. At one point, she met this famous journalist George Henry Lewis, and they could understand each other so well. But George Henry Lewis was an already married man who has 6 children of his own. But Mary Evans was someone who was bold enough to disregard all that, because of the partnership between them was something where she felt so valued and so equal to George Henry Lewis. So he, in fact, guided her readings in philosophy, religion, history, and invited her to express her views on several controversial subjects. By 1854, Evans decided to defy convention and live openly with Lewis. So those days, you can imagine, in 1854, a woman daring to break all rules of society and daring to live in with a man, who was definitely older than her and also was married with 6 children of his own. So that was a very daring step for her. But then this relationship, this partnership, we can say, was almost like a legally wedded marriage, because there was so much of love and unity and equality in this relationship. So in all sense, it was a marriage, and the partnership continued happily until the death of Lewis in 1878. And they shared learning and scholarship and read each other's works and gained by their intellectual and emotional bond. Actually, when she married, she was expecting him to treat her like a secretary, just like Dorothea, the character. We find parallels there. But then, George Henry Lewis turns out to be so good to her, and she becomes very happy because he never treats her like a lesser individual. Gives her equal status. But then after his death, she is very unhappy. Eliot's novels, though holding a common theme of exploring limits of provincial society, depict the interplay between environment and moral choice. Then, during the writing of Middlemarch, George Eliot was struck with writer's block. Okay, so writer's block in the sense when sometimes when writers write, at some point they get stuck and they can't go on. So it was said that when she was creating Middlemarch, there came a point when she felt that she could not go further with the story, and she started writing another story of this idealistic young woman called Miss Brooke. But then later she could join that with the rest of the story, and that is how it gained all the depth. So see, it was at this time when she got her writer's block that she started writing about Miss Brooke, going deep into the psychological compulsions of an idealistic woman. And critic F.R. Lewis was to say, George Eliot tends to identify herself with Dorothea. The Dorothea is far from being the whole of George Eliot. So there are aspects of George Eliot in the character of Dorothea. Although we cannot say Dorothea is George Eliot in its entirety. It's not like that. But there are parallels that we can trace with Dorothea. Going on further. Now, what are the ideas that we can sort of connect with Miss Brooke? So Miss Brooke, that is Dorothea Brooke. She dreams of social improvement, and it's articulated within an old provincial society that is passing through rapid change, and people discuss the achievements of a talented Dr. Lydgate. He's an outsider to Middlemarch, but who comes to Middlemarch to serve the people there. Lydgate is seen as a harbinger of modern science. Harbinger means one who brings, one who ushers in. The small town of Middlemarch itself becomes a subject of inquiry within the complex dynamics of class and gender. So this is how we can describe this novel. See, the town itself, that place itself becomes the location for George Eliot's inquiry into the dynamics of class. How do people from different classes behave with each other? What exactly happens when they interact? What happens with gender, man versus woman? How does all this play in a small provincial town? So when she wrote, her publisher made sure that she did not read too many reviews about them. Because in fact, when the book came out, it got a lot of reviews, but her publisher chose a select few and let Mary Evans or George Eliot read only a few favorable ones. So, she consequently felt that she had read only good things about them. Then, coming to the prelude to Middlemarch, Saint Teresa and Miss Brooke. So, Miss Brooke's character is based on a saint, a saint in the 16th century, actually a Carmelite nun. And what is the connection that Eliot wants to give to the character of Dorothea Brooke and this Carmelite nun called Saint Teresa? So that's what we're going to read here. See, the novel opens with a statement of connection between a 16th century Carmelite nun Saint Teresa of Avila and Dorothea Brooke, a central figure in the story of Middlemarch. Now, who was Saint Teresa? She was, her original name was Teresa de Cepeda I don't know how it is pronounced, Ahumada. And she was born in 1515 in Avila and spent her life in Spain practicing and preaching a doctrine of austere and contemplative life. She was one of the great mystics of the Roman Catholic Church, a woman leader and author of several spiritual classics. As the initiator of the Carmelite order, she restored and emphasized the observances of poverty and abstinence as the nuns dedicated themselves to the service of community. So she was a Carmelite nun, and she spent her life in Spain practicing this austerity, a very deeply austere life spent in thoughts, contemplation, thoughts. And she was one of the women leaders of the church, who was also the author of many books, spiritual classics. And she was an initiator of the Carmelite order. She established this Carmelite order, and she also gave a lot of emphasis on nuns observing poverty and abstinence. Abstinence is staying away from something. Abstain, like for example, abstaining from smoking or drinking. Abstinence. The nuns, and she wanted the nuns to be, completely in service of the community. And she insisted upon subsistence only through public alms, just like we have in India also, right? We have these. The sages and all, we have heard stories of how they used to go around and how they would eat only if they got something in alms from the people. So same way, she insisted that nuns should survive or subsist through public alms, ensuring that there was an active contact between nuns and the society. So this was Saint Teresa. Now, how did Eliot use Saint Teresa to connect with her heroine, Dorothea Brooke? So Eliot used Saint Teresa legend for her own purposes to talk about the difficult situations women must face. Eliot uses Saint Teresa, a foundress of nothing. So this is how she refers to Saint Teresa in the beginning of the novel. Saint Teresa, a foundress of nothing. This is how George Eliot introduces Saint Teresa. In reality, Saint Teresa was not a foundress of nothing. In fact, she was successful in establishing and taking care of around 16 convents in Spain, and she inspired St. John of the Cross to initiate Carmelite reform for men. So she is not a powerless nun at all. She was a very powerful, strong presence. And also she had supporters like, very high level supporters like the King of Spain and Pope. So we can't really say that she can be compared to Dorothea. Dorothea was an ordinary woman. Right? Intelligent, definitely. Questioning mind, definitely. All that. But we cannot justify Eliot calling Saint Teresa as a foundress of nothing. We know, in fact, that she was very powerful and she had strong supporters also. So why Eliot calls her like this is that she wants to use Saint Teresa to remind that, women have to struggle a lot against external circumstances. So for a woman to be heard and come up in life, she has to struggle a lot against external circumstances. Next one. Now, F.R. Lewis states that, Dorothea, to put it another way, is a product of George Eliot's own soul hunger, another daydream ideal self. George Eliot's own soul hunger is manifested through the character of Dorothea. And it is a soul hunger that makes Dorothea see Cassava as a winged messenger. So the soul hunger that Dorothea wanted to do good, like Saint Teresa wanted to do good in the world, Dorothea wants to do good in the world, and she cannot do it on her own. So she tries to find someone with whom she can do something really good for mankind, and that is how she misjudges the work of this man Cassava and marries him. She thinks of him as a winged messenger, like an angel. So argument is a familiar one in 19th century fiction, where themes are often worked by means of a chronological trajectory denoting transition from innocence to experience. So this is a common theme that used to come up in the novels of that time, where innocence moves to experience, ignorance moves to knowledge, or romance moves to realism. Now, other critics. So this is F.R. Lewis' idea about MiddleMarch and the character of Dorothea. But other critics feel that Lewis, when he talked like this about MiddleMarch, was making an ethical criticism more than an artistic criticism. So he seemed to be talking more about morality and ethics there rather than the artistic content of them. However, we know that the world of novel cannot be subjected to absolutist comments on morality and ethics that belong to the discourse of social interaction in a given historical time. In reality, we cannot differentiate things in terms of absolutist comments. Absolutist comments means that is something which is total absolute, where no more questions can be asked. So life is not like that in reality. So, no, especially the world of the novel, we cannot portray something in absolutist terms, especially regarding morality and ethics. So, that is the truth of a world in the novel. Another critic, Arnold Kettle, he feels that while the text remains finite, the reading of the text undergoes change as readers impose their own understanding of a changing world on it. We have interpretations of Shakespeare where we talk about colonialism and all, so many things. But how can we see like years back, people would never have thought of such an idea. But then we are able to do that because we are reinterpreting the text as our time changes. So reading of the text undergoes changes as readers impose their own understanding of a changing world on it. And the text is surviving. That is how this text is surviving. Now, Eliot remarks that the common yearning of womanhood is a vague idea. Another point that Eliot tries to make is that this common yearning of womanhood, that becomes a kind of a vague ideal. There is no clarity in that. The subtext that we read through feminism helps us comprehend that the vagueness or lack of formulation is caused by women's subservient position in this hierarchical structure, be they secular or religious. So in the novel, Eliot seems to be talking about the common yearning that womanhood has. Okay, but this ideal that womanhood seems to aspire for is something that is remaining very vague in that, because there is no formulation in that. And if you read it through the eyes of feminism, there is no formulation to the yearnings of womanhood, because a woman is not given that position where she can ask questions and completely realize the ideals that she has. She is always given a subservient position in society. In the hierarchical structure of society, woman is given a subservient position. So Eliot's remark about the common yearning of womanhood is felt to be a vague, which is again, when you interpret through the framework of feminism, we realize that it is so, it is like that because women were given a subservient position in society, whether it is secular or religious. So thus joining Dorothea and Saint Teresa, right? So in that sense, we can say Dorothea and Saint Teresa can be placed on the same level. Okay? Whether it was Saint Teresa or this powerful nun, or it is Dorothea. They are both women. They are both people who have to fight against the subservient position given to women in the structure of society at that point in time. Okay, so whether secular or religious, they had to fight against society. And that is a point which discusses the gendered oppression that woman in fact feels in society of MiddleMarch. Going on. Now, what are the different themes that we come across in MiddleMarch? Okay. First one is the theme of vocation. Vocation in the sense, what does one want to do? This is mainly illustrated by Dorothea Brooke and Tertius Lydgate, but has vital connections to Cassava's failed intellectualism, Bulstrode's fraudulent success, Fairbrother's precarious ministry, and Mary Garth's care. So the theme of vocation, we can see as examples Dorothea Brooke, Tertius Lydgate, who are idealistic and want to do good for society. But it also talks about people like Cassava, who wanted to write a very important scholarly book, but it's a failed intellectual plan that he has. Then Bulstrode appears to be a very kind and benevolent and successful banker, but his success is very fraudulent, we realize when we know the past about his life. Fairbrother's ministry is always very precarious, very shaky. And Mary Garth is very full of kindness. She's very upright in her personality and also very caring in her personality. So one is a theme of vocation. Second one is a theme of marital compatibility, or rather the lack of it. Dorothea and Lydgate are examples, right? Dorothea marries Cassava, thinking that he is her winged angel, whom she can assist in creating a magnum opus which the world will receive with attention. But once marriage is over, she realizes Cassava is not as much of a scholar as she had thought him to be. Then Lydgate, the idealistic doctor, marries Rosamond, thinking that she will be his partner in the medical research and really be by his side at all times. But Rosamond is very superficial, self-centered, narcissistic. So there is also something that doesn't go very smoothly. So marital compatibility, or rather the lack of it. Now, Will Ladislaw is the one who eventually Dorothea falls in love with, and in the end, after Cassava dies, they marry. So this marital compatibility, it's actually showing the gap between the dreams and the reality, the realm of dreams and the realm of possibilities. The next theme that you can see in MiddleMarch is the theme of monetary and pecuniary interest connected with money. Lydgate's idealism flounders on Rosamond's enchantment with beautiful things. So Lydgate, the idealistic doctor who wants to forget himself and live for society. But is he able to do that? Now he has to satisfy the demands of his wife. So money is important. He doesn't have money. Rosamond's lifestyle requires a lot of money. So the theme of money is part of MiddleMarch. Dorothea, on the other hand, does not want Cassava's money. Cassava, after he dies, leaves a will where he makes it clear that he will disinherit Dorothea if she remarries. So Dorothea's disregard for Cassava, money plays an important theme in Middlemarch. Now, another point is birth, rank, and class. Very strongly divisive factors. In case of Dorothea and Ladislaw, their union is forbidden. Society forbids the union of Dorothea and Ladislaw. So divisive factors there. Then Garth and Vincy families. Mary Garth is in love with Fred Vincy, right? So their families belong to two different social levels. So therefore, that also becomes a sort of a difficulty. So there is more detail given there about Freddie Vincy. See, a lovable but irresponsible young man. He has expensive habits but no money. A tragic outcome is that he is almost forced into religious vocation, entirely unsuited to his temperament. And Mary prevents him from entering this unsuitable vocation. Mary says that I will not marry you if you become if you enter the church. Then another theme that is there in the novel is the theme of politics. Now there is this writer called Stendhal who has written that politics in a literary work is like a gunshot in the middle of a concert, something vulgar and however something which is impossible to ignore. So politics in a literary work is something that we cannot ignore. It is part and parcel of what happens in the novel. Though it is, very vulgar, though it is almost like hearing a gunshot in the middle of a concert, where when music is playing, right, when mellifluous music is playing, suddenly if you hear a gunshot, it will spoil the music. So talking about politics in the middle of a novel would be like that. But it is something that cannot be ignored, impossible to ignore. Now, what is politics that comes into play in Middlemarch? Constant references to the Reform Bill during the politics of social change is always there in the novel. Constantly, it is there in the novel. British parliamentary bills that became acts in 1832, 1867, 1884, and 85. But our novel is set during the time of the first Reform Bill that was passed, which is in 1832. And what was that about? Enfranchising less wealthy segments of society. In all, the upper levels of property holders, nobility, and gentry lost their hegemony to democratic forces. So, all the power wielded by the aristocrats and the rich property holders, that was gone. Now, the common man could also have a say in the whole democratic system. So that was the politics that you find, the theme of politics. Okay, reform bills of especially 1832. Science, another topic that comes up in Middlemarch. Contested systems of knowledge, both old and new. So the topic of science is dealt with how it is received by the people. Okay, where some of them appreciate the new systems of knowledge embodied in science, whereas the others seem to question it. Now, Lydgate was one who was part of the new way of thinking concerning medicine. And at first, when he comes to Middlemarch, he is welcomed for his medical expertise. But later on, after the scandal with the death of Mr. Raffles and Bulstrode's past being revealed, Lydgate falls from grace, and he's actually expelled from Middlemarch. He has to leave Middlemarch. Going on. The next question is of religion. George Eliot rebelled against orthodoxy, right? We know that from her life. She refused to go to church. She broke with her father because she no longer believed in going to church. She questioned the church, and she was someone who lived in a relationship with her partner openly outside of marriage. So she was someone who rebelled against orthodoxy and religion also. And religion and politics merge in the world of MiddleMarch as personal affiliations gain precedence and evoke fierce loyalties. So you find this religion and politics being discussed by the people of MiddleMarch. Especially there is a party scene where they discuss their various political affiliations and religious ideologies. So religion is also a theme that you find in Middlemarch. Now, another theme that you find is that of egotism. Egotism has traditionally been linked to excess of pride and vanity. Pride in oneself, vanity regarding oneself. However, in terms of psychological vocabulary, the term ego, as Freud and Jung have used it, becomes an attribute of normal human behavior. It is a particularized I which distinguishes an individual. Freud and Jung, I'm sure you've heard of these names, right? Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. So ego, as Freud described it, okay, he divided this human personality into three elements: id, ego, and superego. Have you heard of these terms?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so it is the unrepressed element of our personality, whereas ego is what makes us who we are. Okay, and it is that ego that we are talking about here, this particularized I which distinguishes an individual. So in terms of psychological vocabulary, when we talk about ego, we are talking about what is it that makes me me. In modern psychology, the ego is a self-determining component in the individual will to succeed. Right? An individual's motivation to succeed, individual willpower to succeed, is determined by how the ego is put together. Now, that is how we can analyze the characters of Rosamond, Lydgate, Dorothea to honest factors motivating their actions. Right? Rosamond, how can we associate Rosamond? Self-centeredness, right? Lydgate also is self-centered in that sense, because when he sees Rosamond, he forgets all the ideals that he had. Dorothea is also in a way failing to see that her relationship with Cassava is going to be something very much less than what is idealistic. So we can analyze these characters and the reasons which make them do these whatever actions that they take, why they do that. We are able to analyze them through their egos, egotism, basically saying how their personalities are characterized, which makes them unable to see the dialectical relation between the individual and society. So the word dialectical there. Dialectical means something that is acting out through opposing forces. So individual versus society. It does not always work out the way the individual has planned. Society will also have its own interaction. So Rosamond, Lydgate and Dorothea are examples of the factors that motivate their actions based on how they fail to see the dialectical relations of their actions, that is between the individual and society. Going to the next topic here. Now, how is Miss Brooke positioned? How is Dorothea positioned? Okay, when the novel begins, she's compared to Saint Teresa, and apparently, Dorothea is positioned on a low scale of expectation, even as she's admired for an elevated sense of service to the community. So Eliot presents her as a character who has high sense of ideals, who is admired for the sense of service that she has towards the community. At the same time, not much is expected from her. Okay, so a low scale of expectation. Now, there is this American critic called Stanley Fish who talks about reader response criticism, reader response theory. Okay? Now, he says that meanings are not extracted but made and made not by encoded forms but by not by, but made not by encoded forms, but by interpretive strategies that call forms into being. That is, meanings are made, right? Uh, and made not by encoded forms, but how we interpret it, how we interpret what we read. Basically, in simple words, what he's saying is that the meaning that you make from something you read or a film that you watch is created by how we interpret it and the forms that are called into its creation. Our responses are created from our subjectivity, and it's not entirely free. Whatever response that we have towards something is very subjective as opposed to objective. The way I see the world colors the way in which I approach it, right? We are all living on the same planet, but the planet that each one of us inhabits is our own personal planet, right? We may be sitting in the same room, but our worlds are very different, right? Even if we are sitting in the same room, right? Because the way we see the world is through our eyes, and which is very subjective as opposed to objective. So Stanley Fisher, reader response. So each reader, when he gets a book, sees it in a different way. George Eliot directs the reader's imagination by presenting vivid descriptions of a character's outward demeanor and inner personality. The modern day reader is not willing to remain a passive recipient of authorial control. I told you earlier how in the 60s and all, they were ready to accept this element of authorial control. But the modern reader does not want this authorial control there. The modern author does not want to be told what he should think, what he or she should think when they read something. They want to come to their own conclusions. They don't want to be led by the author. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, further to the remarks of Stanley Fish, theoreticians like Umberto Eco, another name, okay? Umberto Eco was a writer and a theoretician, point out that between the intention of the author and the intention of the interpreter, there is a third possibility. So, one is the intention of the author, what the author wants to write, okay? Intention of the author. Second, when we read it, we have another way of making that text, right? We are creating another text. But then Umberto Eco says that there is a third possibility. There is an intention of the text. And the reader makes the text his or her own by excavating this hidden wealth of. So when we appreciate something or when we don't like something, so we do it by going beneath the surface of what we see. So third possibility is the intention of the text itself. So intention of the author, intention of the interpreter, and intention of the text. That is a picture I have put there of Dorothea and Cassava. You can see how Cassava looks so much older than her, right? Then, in the beginning of Middlemarch, George Eliot seems to prophesy a tragedy for a woman whose lofty ideals must collide with the limitations of a provincial town. But then, focus turns on societal constraints on a woman. Things change. Dorothea's ideas about marriage were too idealistic, too unrealistic. So George Eliot is trying to talk about how tragedy falls for a woman with lofty ideas, because these lofty ideas will definitely collide or be opposed by the limitations imposed on her by a provincial town, by a small provincial town. But then the focus turns on societal constraints on women, and then things change. Now we talk about how Dorothea approached marriage, okay, which was very unrealistic. Now the quotation tells you very clearly. See, Dorothea, with all her eagerness to know the truths of life, retained very childlike ideas about marriage. The really delightful marriage must be that where your husband was sort of a father and could teach you even Hebrew if you wished it. Can that be a realistic look at what marriage is? What do you guys feel? Yeah, I mean, it's not always possible that a husband is going to be like a father who's going to sit patiently and teach you anything you want to know, right? So that was too idealistic, okay, too unrealistic, and that is why she makes a mistake in marrying Cassava. Now, how do we approach the character of Cassava? See, he's seen as an unsuitable suitor. He's an aged scholar, almost 27 years older than Dorothea, and their courtship is often called as one of the driest courtship in literary history. Can you imagine that? His idea, elevation of thought and capabilities of devotedness. Now, he is approaching marriage with this idea. He wants a girl, he wants a woman who has got this, elevation of thought and capability to be devoted to him. And she gladly dreams of a life of usefulness as his amanuensis, his intellectual companion and devoted wife. But then she wants to have closeness with Cassava. He is not able to do that. He feels very ill at ease and uncomfortable when she wants to go beyond that. He only wants her like a secretary. Amanuensis is like a helper. So she's dreaming of that sort of, equality with him, but that's not what happens. And now you compare the relationship Dorothea has with Cassava with Eliot's relationship with Lewis, her partner. George Eliot had warned us about Dorothea's childlike notions and how Dorothea shies away from contemplating any adult aspects of marriage, which must necessarily deal with sexuality, mothering, domestic arrangements, social commitments, etc. So Dorothea does not have any idea regarding all those aspects of marriage, whether it's sexuality, whether it is being a person with practical or sense of practicality enough to manage the domestic affairs. She doesn't have any ideas or notions regarding all that. She is very idealistic, unrealistic, approaching marriage in a childlike manner. Dorothea's soul hunger is contrasted by the vibrant materiality of her sister Celia, who enjoys fine clothes and jewels. So, contrasting with Dorothea's almost unworldly attitude is the attitude of her sister Celia. There is a scene where Celia comes with their mother's jewels, and Celia already enjoys all the finer things in life. But Dorothea runs away from any materiality, any wealth or all of those things, material possessions. But at this point, when Celia brings her mother's jewels, Dorothea is also equally attracted to the beauty of the jewels before her. But then, Dorothea is drawn to the jewels at first, but then suddenly she pulls back. She finds such covetousness inappropriate for herself. And therefore, we can see as readers, we are able to notice that there are contradictions in her idealism. So as an idealist, she's given up everything materialistic, all wealth and everything like that. But the sight of these beautiful jewels, makes her want one for herself. And she suddenly pulls back when she realizes that she is acting contrary to her indicated nature. So we find contradictions in Dorothea's idealism. Going to the next one. Now the world beyond. To integrate. So to integrate the different happenings in MiddleMarch, there is a dinner party. And that's like a very brilliant device used by Eliot to bring different characters in MiddleMarch to come together and talk together, and different topics are also discussed during this part. So we also see how the stories of Dorothea and Lydgate come together during the party scene. So using a range of Middlemarch residents, Eliot presents local concerns and predilections in a small town engaged in social gossip, politics, current news, reform bills, marriage of Cassava, Dorothea, Ladislaw, Lydgate. No one is left. When people gossip, you know how it is, right? Everything is discussed. Politics and current affairs and everything is discussed. Now, the narrative technique that Eliot uses here is brilliant, okay? Like almost like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. I think you've already done Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, so you know what I'm talking about, right? In Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the innkeeper is the one who is a cohesive factor, and the pilgrims narrate their stories one by one, and the conversations where the pilgrims and the innkeeper talk actually gives us readers information about medieval English society written in the 1300s. Right? When we read it now, the talk between the pilgrims and the innkeeper tells us how medieval English society was. The nun's tale, the nun's priest's tale, all of those things. So George Eliot is the narrator here, and George Eliot takes the position of an omniscient narrator. In fact, Middlemarch, we can say third person omniscient narrator. Third person omniscient narrator, do you understand what it means? If I use the term third person omniscient narrator, do you people understand that? Anyone? Yes or no? What is the meaning of the word omniscient? Tell me.
Someone who, the all-knowing.
Yes, one who knows everything. Okay. So
outside of the story.
One who knows everything about the story, right? About what the character is saying, thinking, etc. Omniscient narrator. And when a writer is writing like that, does he use I there? Does a character speak?
No, ma'am.
Madam, he uses he, she.
He, she. That is third person. Exactly. That is third person. Okay? All right? So, omniscient narrator, third person. You understood now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Now, the outsider. The man of modern medicine. That is the next character we're going to be talking about. The man of modern medicine, Tertius Lydgate. Lydgate's vision of the betterment of health and his desire to see reform in medical systems give him the necessary result. A small town offers him an opportunity. So that's why he comes to Middlemarch. He has this vision for a better health for the people of England. And he wants to bring in reforms in the medical systems. So that is the resolution, that is the motivation behind coming to Middlemarch. His idealism in thought is not matched by idealism in action. Right? Why? How can we say that? In thought, he has all these high notions, highly idealistic notions. But in actions, when he marries Rosamond, everything is lost. He is vulnerable to emotionality, even though he claims to be on a scientific quest. That is, the Dr. Lydgate. Now, the Angel of Light. Angel of Light is here none other than our Will Ladislaw. So, he is described as a painter, an aesthete, much disliked cousin of Cassava. Okay, Cassava does not like him because Dorothea is close to him. And Dorothea innocently befriends him during her honeymoon in Rome. And Dorothea innocently builds comparisons between her old scholarly husband and the charming young Bohemian. The first impression, in fact, this is a quotation there. The first impression on seeing Will was one of sunny brightness. So when Dorothea and Cassava were on honeymoon in Rome, Cassava is in his own world. Okay, he does not give any attention or any sort of importance to Dorothea. She's almost left to her own devices. And luckily for her, Will Ladislaw is there at that time, and he is the one who takes her around and shows her different places, explains the art that she's seeing to her, and laughs at whatever she says. So he becomes very dear to her. She is drawn to his personality. If he is the sun, there stands Cassava completely rayless. He's like a dark cloud, rayless, without any light. So that is the contrast given there. Will Ladislaw, the impression is of sunny brightness, and Cassava is standing there rayless. Will Ladislaw, we cannot say is an intellectual or anything. He lacks any more intellectual or moral depth that can match Dorothea's ardor for the upliftment of the poor community. His seductive charm relies substantially on his ability to play with words. He talks very beautifully. That is how he is able to attract Dorothea. Because at home she is denied conversations. Denied conversations at home, Dorothea falls into an easy companionship with a relative stranger who, along with word making, has a gift for laughter and the absurd dimensions of human behavior. Imagine this young wife. She is 27 years younger than Cassava, and they're on their honeymoon. She has no one to talk to. Okay, her husband, old and completely behind his scholarly pursuits, does not give her any attention. And then comes a young man, bright and sunny and full of laughter, very artistic, talking to her. So that is how Dorothea becomes closer to Will Ladislaw. So generally, critics have been very harsh on Ladislaw, but to Dorothea, he is a halo of light. So he's bathed in light for Dorothea. Then, a matter of money. Okay, a character in fiction is presented through at least three kinds of perception. When you make a character analysis, character study, or character sketch, we make a character sketch by analyzing how a character is presented through three different ways. Okay, one is what the person says about the self. Two, what others individually or collectively advance as their assessment. And thirdly, how the author intervenes from a vantage point. The author, in this case, omniscient author who knows everything about all the characters, how does an author deal with the character? So from all these, we come to conclusions about a character. What the character himself, the dialogues that a person says. Now, what is talked about a character by other characters in the book, and also what the author himself or herself says about the character. Best example I can give you is in the plays of Shakespeare, right? Before the main character, before heroes, Macbeth or someone comes onto the stage, they are talked about by other lesser important characters, which is like building their personality, so that we, when the audience is ready to see the hero, we are really waiting for that character to come on stage. That's the technique that Shakespeare uses. So similarly, we're building the character of a person. We assess a character, we analyze the character to what the character says, and also what is said about that character by others individually and collectively. Eliot presents the character of Mr. Bulstrode through early hints of mystery, guilt, power hunger as seen in this court. Bulstrode, the Bulstrode who has his dark past in him. Eliot, as a writer, is already giving us hints about what is going to happen with this character. Because in the dialogues that Bulstrode speaks, we understand that he's not as honest as he appears, or he tries to make himself be. It was a principle with Mr. Bulstrode to gain. That is a quote that I have put there on the slide. George Eliot. When Middlemarch was published, it was using the pseudonym George Eliot. She tried to achieve the range considered appropriate in a realist novel by giving details of scientific development, political processes, industrial progress, since these were subjects women were not supposed to know about. So the name she was using was that of a man. And a man to be able to speak about industrial progress, was believed to be authoritative at that time. He talked about the limits of knowledge. Unique. So recalling Plato. Now, David Lodge, the critic that we talked about earlier, adapts Plato's terms mimesis and diagesis. This also we discussed in the last class, if you remember. Mimesis and diagesis. What is mimesis? See, narrating by imitating another's speech, and diagesis is narrating in one's own voice. So mimesis is narrating by imitating someone else's, right? So we are being told something by someone. That is mimesis. Diagesis is narrating in one's own voices. So here we can say that Middlemarch uses mostly dialogue and description in order to build up the story. And sometimes the technique for narration is interior monologue. Interior monologue means what is happening in the mind of a character. Okay, in drama, when this happens on stage, we have these asides, we have these dramatic monologues happening, right? But in novel, we have this interior monologue that shows what is happening to the character. Dramatis personae means characters in the play, as far as the play is concerned. So dialogue is there, description is there, and sometimes to know what is happening in the mind of a character, we have interior monologues. Then what are the philosophical underpinnings based on which she wrote her book? So now, first of all, we have to understand that a lot of transitions you can see happening in the novel. Transitions from the subject of youthful idealism to disillusionment, which is brought about by experience. We will be talking about book 3, which is titled Waiting for Death. I told you when while Middlemarch was published, it was published in different parts, okay, at first, and then it was consolidated into 4 different parts in 1872, I think. So in book 3, that is titled Waiting for Death, you can see several changes happening in the dynamics of social and personal attachments. First is that of Cassava. Waiting for death, it is Cassava who is waiting for death. Cassava, who had been dismissed as a great bladder for dried peas to rattle in. This is how Eliot describes him at first. Great bladder for dried peas to rattle in. Empty air, okay, full of empty noise, that's all. An aged and dedicated scholar determined to write his magnum opus, which is titled A Key to All Mythologies. Cassava had misjudged his compatibility with Dorothea, just as she also had. Even during their stay in Rome, he had developed an uncomfortable feeling of being spied upon and being suspected of pursuing a fruitless endeavor. So even during their honeymoon, he feels Cassava does not want the presence of Dorothea with him all the time. Because he feels it's like, she's spying upon his work and also judging him. Because he understands that she does not regard him with the same high esteem that she had for him earlier. He was irritated by her proximity, yet jealous of her absence. So when she wants. When she goes out with Will Ladislaw, he becomes jealous also. Now, with arrival of Ladislaw in Rome, things become worse. Now, the question that we ask ourselves when we read the novel is, do we look at the character of Cassava with pity or not? So, you can imagine, this older man who has got his young wife, full of enthusiasm, who does not want her enthusiasm or energy so much, and he's also insecure. This young man, Will Ladislaw, is also there in the picture, and she is very obviously attracted to Will Ladislaw in a very innocent way, definitely. Okay, but he becomes kind of unsettled because of that. So, do we as readers understand the situation of Cassava? Now, another aspect that is discussed in your materials is difference between what Lydgate wants to achieve versus what Cassava wants to achieve. Cassava is also a scholar. Lydgate is also very much scholar in the field of medicine, right? So what is the difference between what they both want to achieve? Now, doctor and the social worker desire improvement in the lives of others, whereas Cassava, that is the egotistical scholar, he covets fame for himself. He wants to be well known through this magnum opus that he is writing, which is called the Key to All Mythology. So there is a difference between what they both aspire for. Whereas the doctor wants something that is beneficial to all of mankind, Cassava, the aged scholar, wants something through which he will be remembered forever. So one is very self-centered, right? That of Cassava, the idea of Cassava is kind of more selfish than that of Lydgate. That is a difference between the two, although both are scholarly. In the light of Cassava's failing health, self-reflection for Dorothea. She feels, she's not being good to him. It's the time for self-reflection. And she is beset by feelings of, guilt and fear. Also, a hostility towards him. Helplessness is there. Then a resolve is there. And a multitude of related emotions battle for primacy in her review of her marriage with Cassava. So Cassava's health is failing, and Dorothea is increasingly dissatisfied with the marriage, yet feeling guilty about not being good to her husband. So she treats him very well, takes care of him through his illness. Now, Dorothea's desire to give primacy or importance to her husband's needs is met with a cold, mean reticence on Cassava's part. So when she feels guilty for being kind of hostile towards Cassava, she tries to make up for it by being good to him. But how does Cassava take it? He does not take it with happiness. In fact, he resents it. He stays away from her. He's aloof with her, reticent with her, holds back on his affections. Her innocence, which does not permit her to see Ladislaw's attention, is a strong cause of Cassava's rudeness. So Cassava is rude to her because he understands that Will Ladislaw is attracted to her. But Dorothea is very happy in Ladislaw's company, definitely. But she is at this time she has very innocent friendship with Will Ladislaw. But Cassava is able to see where this is going to lead to. So Cassava's egotism, aware of his failure in scholarly pursuit, and doubt regarding Dorothea's loyalty is what troubles him. So look at the complexity in this character of Cassava, right? If imagine being a writer like George Eliot, trying to present a character like Cassava, right? Married to someone younger, more vivacious, more energetic, and all the insecurities that he feels, especially when someone young like Will Ladislaw also comes into the scene. So, going on. Now, attraction, a hidden subject, a subject that is not talked about in this relation between Will Ladislaw and Dorothea is that of sexuality. Okay? Attraction between Will and Dorothea has its sexual aspect, like though not admitted to the surface text of the novel. the dry intellection of Cassava and his distaste for any kind of bodily touch is mentioned. So he is totally not at all sensual, okay, Cassava. Whereas Will and Dorothea feel this magnetism towards each other. Will, see, when you contrast how Cassava regards physical contact versus Will, we can say that Cassava has total distaste for any kind of bodily touch. Will, on the other hand, is thinking about body, color, taste, sound, uh, though not directly about sexual things. He talks about art, okay, in the context of art. But then, those days, Victorian writing, nobody wrote directly about sex. Okay, it was always depersonalized into implicit sexuality. Implicit versus explicit. Implicit is something which is already there in it. When you read it, you feel its presence. It doesn't have to be spelt out in an outward manner. Okay, not explicitly. It doesn't have to be spoken out loud and clear. It is already understood when he talks about art, when he talks about the sensuality and the beauty regarding it, that there are sexual undercurrents playing in Mill's talk. Now we come to two writers, okay, two writers who made this groundbreaking study as far as feminist writing is concerned. Almost like a seminal work in feminist reading that is called Mad Woman in the Attic. So these were two teachers actually, Sandra Gilbert and Susan Hubbard. And based on their teaching, they put all that together to write this book called Mad Woman in the Attic, where they talk about how women characters in novels of the 19th century are definitely experiencing this feeling of being imprisoned or restricted, or being in that as mad or unfit to be in society and imprisoned or taken away from society. So that is written, that is basically what they write about in Mad Woman in the Attic. It's a very important book. Okay. So Susan Gilbert and Sandra Gilbert and Susan Hubbard demonstrated that women writers had to resort to indirect ways in order to